everyone, and welcome. Before I give some opening remarks, we are going to watch a short video.
So this is from the publisher, Naval Institute Press. They put a lot of work into this book trailer, as they call it. So I hope you enjoy it.
Let's start simple. You Russians always believed your spies were better.
We did not believe it. We proved it.
Rudolph Abel, New York. Deep cover. You called him one of your best.
He lived among you for years. No embassy, no protection. Just tradecraft.
Adolf Tokachev, the engineer who gave us your radar secrets.
Worthless traitor.
A hero to us.
One man nearly destroyed our air defense network because your CIA knew something. Every system has a weakness.
Aldrich Ames.
Now that was professional operation.
He betrayed us.
He gave us everything. Your agents, your secrets, even your arrogance.
So, what changed? Putin. Ukraine.
You want the truth? This is only the beginning.
As we receive reports that Russian forces have reached an area just north of Ukraine's capital city, Kyiv. This is a video on social media today appearing to show Russian armored vehicles driving through the residential district of Obolak to the north of the city centre.
Потому что война никогда не меняется.
So hello and welcome once again to this lecture by the Institute of World Politics. My name is Melissa Jaworby-Pratt, Director of National Security Internship Programs at IWP, and soon to be graduate this May from the IWP Statecraft and National Security Affairs Master of Arts program. For those of you who are new to IWP, we are the Graduate School of National Security, Intelligence, and International Affairs. We offer doctoral and PhD programs, 8 master's degree programs, including 2 online MAs, and 18 certificates of graduate study. If you're interested in learning more about us, please speak to one of our staff at the conclusion of this event, or visit iwp.edu. We would like to thank all of our supporters who make IWP events programs possible. And to support the work of IWP, please visit iwp.edu/donate. Today we will be hearing a talk from Sean M. Wiswesser on his book titled Tradecraft, Tactics, and Dirty Tricks, Russian Intelligence and Putin's Secret War. Sean has nearly 30 years of experience working as a national security professional with intelligence, foreign service, and defense organizations. As a senior operations officer with the CIA, he served on multiple overseas tours and many other deployments on temporary duty, including war zone service. He was a chief of station and had multiple joint duty assignments with intelligence community partners. Sean was a Moorhead Scholar at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, with a bachelor's degree in Russian and in history and Russian and Slavic linguistics. He was awarded a Master of Strategic Studies in 2023 from the Air War College and received the Russia Integrated Deterrence Award. With that, please join me in welcoming Sean Wiswesser.
Thank you, Misty, for the kind introduction. I want to thank the Chancellor and IWP for having me here. I want to thank my colleague Glenn Korn, who helped way back in the fall. The book was still just kind of an idea. This was the very first event that we booked for my book. I'm proud to say it's a bestseller right now on Amazon. It's the very top of the category for Russian politics, and it's top 10 in Russian history on Amazon. And so, thank you. So I mentioned that grateful to Naval Institute Press as my publisher, and now we're getting a lot of invitations, but it's really cool that IWP was the very first. So thank you again, Missy, to you, your team, Shannon, everyone that helped to get me here. I want to thank my friends and colleagues. I have some friends here that are from all aspects of my life, from boarding school, from college, many of you from CIA. I'm proud to have some members of the Special Forces team that helped keep me safe when I served in Afghanistan. Join me with them. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Joe Eid, for being here, who was did a lot for us as one of our Afghans that we helped eventually get out. So it means a lot to me to have segments of my life represented here. Thank you, Paul, for coming as a senior CIA officer and now president of our retiree organization, AFIO. Many other colleagues and friends that have come, so it means a lot to me, and really it's very touching. So we're going to talk about Russian hybrid war. It's one of the topics I cover in my book, and it's one of kind of all-encompassing topic, because it's a way to talk about Russian intelligence and what they're up to. I'm going to talk for about a half hour, and then we're going to take questions, and I really enjoy questions. I like taking questions. I feel comfortable on a platform. Hopefully that comes across with you all now, but my voice is struggling, so I apologize for that. I taught 8 of the 28 years I was in the intelligence community. I taught at various academies, and one of the things I was always passionate about is the Russian intelligence services and just how menacing and implacable a foe and an adversary they are to the United States. However, for most of my career, they weren't regarded as such in our national security strategy. To start off, when I say that, my opinions are my own, represent my own views, not the views of CIA nor any other government agency. But regardless of what administration was in power, Democrat or Republican, if you look back on the 30 years that most of my career was encompassed by, and you know, we were lucky if Russia was top 10 for most of that period. And listen, we had legitimate things the United States was concerned with. We were at war for 20 years. I just mentioned being deployed with some of the veterans here from Special Forces. Any of you that served, I appreciate your service. I don't use the term distracted. I say we were engaged. We were a country very much engaged in mortal threats to our livelihood. Al-Qaeda, then we were at war in Iraq. And so I think in many ways Russia got a pass until and if, invariably, Vladimir Putin, and particularly Russian intelligence services, always thrust themselves back in the limelight in the worst ways possible. So invading other countries, as they did in Georgia, invading Ukraine in 2014, they kind of got a pass on that, and we're going to talk about that a bit here with information warfare. And then finally and conclusively, and then meddling in our election in 2016, which they absolutely did. And I make the point always, not for any one individual candidate, as much as they were meddling with our democracy and trying to undermine our very system of democracy. And then finally in 2022, they invaded the largest land invasion since World War II. And finally, now Russia's getting attention, and they're in the news a lot. So what are they in the news for besides Ukraine? And that's enough, right? They invaded a country with the goal to completely take over Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's goal, he stated it in an essay the year before the war. We're just going to take over Ukraine. They don't have a right to exist. They're not really a country after all. That was the essence of his message, right, in that essay that he famously put out. And in all of their messaging before and since with Ukraine. They don't have a right to exist. By the way, they have a long list of countries they believe don't have a right to exist. When was the last time Europe was challenged with the leader who said, these countries don't have a right to exist? We should remember those lessons from about 100 years ago, because they're very important to us now. So, not only with the war in Ukraine, but over the past 2 years, European authorities have been challenged disrupted by sabotage plots against rail lines, exploding planes like in Lithuania when a cargo airliner went down, assassination attempts linked to Russian operatives like the one against Rheinmetall CEO in Germany, leader of a company, not any official, not a government official, not in the military, but a leader of a company that the GRU tried to assassinate, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, all of these taking place all across Europe, and all of them trace back to Moscow's security and intelligence services. These are not new, although they're presented as new, and we frequently hear in the press reporting, oh, new, these are hybrid war. These are a predictable expression of Russian intelligence service doctrine. The natural question that we have is, are we next, the United States? Or is it already happening here and we're not aware of it? Are we already under attack? So I'm going to share some brief comments about Russian hybrid war. Also, we're going to talk about their terminology, because too often we talk about our concepts and our understanding of it, and then we project that on the Russians. The Russians don't use the term hybrid war. When they do, they say гибридная война. It's a cognate from the English language. What the Russians have been talking about for over 20 years now is they've been talking about non-contact, бесконтактная война. Or another term they use is война нового поколения, so warfare of the next generation. These are not new concepts. So I'm going to talk about that some, and their evolution in the past 20 or 30 years, and then I'm happy to take your questions and we'll continue the discussion. It's important to understand how our adversaries think. And for that we need expertise. And I want to make just a quick plug for the generation that I was raised in CIA. Our former Deputy Director, Mike Sulik, who I was very honored wrote the forward to my book, he believed and we believed that you needed to have expertise in languages, that it mattered, that it's important to study languages. As the Russians say, Russians have a saying, чем дышит человек. So how does a person, what do they breathe literally? How do they think? So when we lose expertise, or when we have struggles like 20 years of war, we tend to lose focus on what the adversary may be thinking and what they're saying and what they're writing in their military magazines and what they were writing in books like 2004, there was a book written by two Russian generals, Slivchenko and Gareev. And in 2004, they wrote a very telling book that a lot of their current hybrid warfare doctrine is on. The book was called, appropriately enough, O будущих войн, so on future wars. And so what they said already back in 2004, recognizing the limitations of their military, recognizing that they were still suffering coming off of the loss of the Soviet budget, where they could devote vast resources towards their military without any accountability. They knew they were recovering from that. They also looked at what the United States was able to do. And remember that for the Russians and their security services, and their military for that matter, as I explained in my book, the United States is always the главный противник. We're always the GEPE, the main adversary, the main enemy. It's always been that way. And so as a Russian intelligence officer told me early in my career, I tried to understand. I said, wait a second, we have the war on terror going on right now. Aren't you guys prioritizing that, or maybe the Chechen conflicts? He said to me, forget about it. For us, you were the main enemy all through the Cold War. You are the main enemy now. You always will be the main enemy of Russia. For us, the United States comes first, before everything else. So in 2004, when these members of the general staff in Russia were writing about future wars, what were they saying? They were talking about using intelligence services and proxies, as what are so-called proxies, also called non-state actors now in some terminology, or organized crime and other figures. They were talking about using them as force multipliers, allowing Moscow to carry out second fronts, permanent second fronts to weaken their adversaries, including information warfare, what the Russians call activnia мероприятия, or active measures. What they were talking about, they believed was doing to the United States and our allies what they believed was happening to them. You have to understand the color revolutions that took place in the first decade of this century. For the Russian intelligence services and for Putin, these were vast plots carried out by my former agency, even though they weren't. He believed CIA must be behind it. The West must be behind people wanting democracy in Ukraine or in Kyrgyzstan or in Georgia. You can't fundamentally have people voting for their leaders and being elected freely and fairly. So that's an anathema to Putin and to the security services and to the Chekist culture that he's a part of. Chekist being Cheka, the first committee for the defense of the revolution after the Bolshevik Revolution. Putin and his siloviki, the strong men around him, that came from his KGB past, they believe very firmly that they need to be in charge, just like in Soviet times. The KGB is in charge. We get to decide. We, the ruling elite, and in the Soviet times it was a Politburo. Now it's just Putin and the siloviki. Now it's just his strong men around him. So we get to decide. Forget about free and fair elections. So early in this century, that first decade, these Russian general staff figures were saying, you know what? Let's let the intelligence services keep up information warfare in a second front, just like we believe the United States is doing anywhere in the former Soviet Union. We're going to use intelligence operations as an extension of politics by other means. That's my terminology. But it's an inversion, of course, of Clausewitz's famous dictum. Using war as politics by other means. For the Russian intelligence services, intelligence operations are an extension of politics by other means. So they were writing about using gray zone tactics already 20 years ago. And what one of the generals said, Slobchenko, had a very telling quote. He said, if we can't figure out how to succeed at non-contact warfare, what we call hybrid warfare, Russia will not exist as a country any longer. That's how central they viewed hybrid warfare. All the things that are listed are happening in Europe now. All these actions as gray zones defined, just below kinetic warfare. Information warfare, assassinations, sabotage. So 20 years ago, they were saying, if we can't figure out how to do this properly, Russia won't survive. Were we paying attention? I would argue we weren't. We weren't paying any attention at all. We weren't even focused on Russia. Let's fast forward now. Who's carrying out these actions? Predictably, these actions have evolved and they've accelerated and they've adapted with the Russian intelligence services. The strengthening of the Russian intelligence services within their society have had a direct correlation with how much more aggressive Russian foreign policy has become in the past 20 years. Who's calling the shots in Russia? It's those inner siloviki, the leaders of the FSB, like Alexander Bortnikov, Narishkin, the head of the SVR, Sergei Shoigu and Gerasimov, the leaders of the military, people like Sechin, head of Rosneft. These are all hardcore KGB veterans that Putin knew his entire career, that when he was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, they were with him. When he was head of the FSB, they stayed with him. Patrusha, Ivanov, they became defense ministers, head of the National Security Council, and they're still with him as a siloviki. So as their power expanded within Russia, so too did the role of the intelligence services calling policy. So that today, within Russia, I would argue, no one is more influential in forming policy than the intelligence and security services. They call the shots. I have a lot of, I graduated Air War College, as was mentioned in my bio. Had a lot of trouble convincing when I was there a few years ago, talking about, in the Russian government today, the intelligence services answer to no one. As the war has progressed, would anybody really argue that they're not in charge? Alexander Bortnikov, the head of the FSB, is given the rank of General of the Russian Army, on par with Gerasimov, the Chief of the General Staff. By the way, he's never served a day in the Russian military. So who is Putin pointing to? Who holds his loyalty and his allegiance? It's those siloviki, it's those members of the security services. Now, they had a huge role in the planning and prognostications of the Ukrainian war. They're the ones, the FSB in particular, had primacy for planning the war. The FSB's 5th Service, formerly led by Sergei Ivanov, one of those siloviki, also a former Minister of Defense, now in the Security Council, they're in charge of operational analytical reporting to the President. And Ukraine, for the FSB and for their security services, remember, the Ukraine's referred to as the near abroad. Because this isn't really a country to them. Remember, Ukraine's part of our old country, the Soviet Union. They're part of the near abroad. So the FSB's 5th Service had a huge role in planning the war. Concentration of power like that has consequences, unfortunately, for Russia. They were deeply flawed in their planning for a short, quick war where they had scripted roles for themselves. The FSB and the GRU and the SVR had essentially said to President Putin, hey, we've got this. It's going to be a quick war. We've got the government infiltrated. We've got key members, turncoats ready to go. They were so convinced they had it right that the Russian blogosphere, that's some of the only freedom you'll ever see in press reporting in Russia anymore, is on their blogosphere, where military veterans and intelligence folks go. I go on there frequently, I try to check out what they're writing in Russian. Well, early in the war, Ukrainians and others reported on, in the blogosphere, FSB senior leaders had been picking out their apartment blocks in Kiev where they were going to settle. They were claiming their spots. Hey, I want this apartment building for me and my guys. You can have that one. That's how confident they were it'd be a short war. Well, when they were tragically wrong, though, there's no accountability for them, right? Because these are Putin's Praetorian Guard, so they get away with it either way. So the Russians have suffered 1.3 million now casualties of their young, not from St. Petersburg and Moscow, by the way. Most of those youth are from Siberian villages and towns we've never heard of. And they've been dying by the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. And remember, nobody's allowed to even call it a war in Russia. So as the wars progressed, the FSB and the other services have only gotten stronger. A good friend of mine, Kevin Reel, is in the UK. He and I were just talking the other day. He's written a definitive book on the FSB. It's called FSB, A Concise History, with Georgetown Press. He just wrote one on the GRU that he allowed me to review and draft. I said, how big do you think the FSB is? Well, before the war, they were on the order of about 400,000, okay? 400,000 officers, counting 200,000 border guards. Given that security services only expand in time of war, probably 500,000 or more now, with a tight chokehold of the Russian people. Every internet service provider in Russia is controlled by the FSB. Not that they just have access, not that they need a warrant, they don't. For 20 years now, they embed their officers in the ISPs. They embed their officers in the phone companies. I argue that there's never been a security service as strong in Russia or the Soviet Union or Tsarist times as there is the FSB today. Look at what they're doing now. What's the next step? They're eliminating Telegram. So this strengthening of the security services has directly related to their actions in Ukraine and in their hybrid warfare. What are some of the examples of what they're doing? One of the most dangerous for the West is active measures, or what they call measures of support. This is where they, along with what they laid out 20 years ago, this is where they prepare the battlefield and information operations. What they do in Georgia. Before the invasion, summer 2008, there was a lot of complaining in the Russian media about the poor people of Ossetia and Abkhazia, two parts of Georgia with different ethnicities, but within Russia and within that Russian propaganda machine, that was the Russian press, listened to and watched on TV across the former Soviet Union. Why is that, by the way? It helps to know their culture. My wife's Lithuanian, most of you know, my friends know that I spent a lot of time in the Baltics. Well, my mother-in-law, she's pure Lithuanian, no Russian background at all. She enjoys watching Russian TV and always did because those are the good movies from Soviet times. They got good music. Anybody that's lived in that part of the world knows it. So what the Russians were pushing out heavily in their news before the war was, hey, somebody's got to save the poor Ossetian and Abkhazian people. They're suffering horribly in Georgia. It's a familiar line, right? Because hint, hint, we came that again in 2014. Somebody's got to take care of the people in the Donbass. So they sent an entire army into Georgia, took over Abkhazia and Ossetia. And what did we do in the West? Reportedly, I like President Bush. I think he was a great president, and my book's strictly apolitical. But I do relate this story, that there's been a story about President Bush saying, you know, supposedly looking at Putin's soul, and he got a sense of the soul of man. I credit that to really bad advice somebody gave him about Ruskaya dusha, and Russian, the Russian soul. But that quote's given a lot of attention. The more important quote that should be talked about is this was reported on, that Putin said to President Bush, apparently, when they were at the Olympics, are you watching what's happening in Georgia? And reportedly, our president said, something's happened in the South, in the United States? And Putin said, no, I'm talking about the country of Georgia. I've heard that story repeated to me from Russian intelligence officers, too. It's important because it shows when our country was thinking about other things. When they were preparing information war against Georgia, what did they do? They sent an entire army into Georgia, and they took over half the country. And we didn't do anything, did we? In the West, the United States and our allies in Europe, we didn't do anything, really, did we? So what did they do in 2014? Continuing their idea of hybrid war, information warfare, and all of its measures. They did the same thing in 2014 because it worked for them. Information warfare, somebody's got to save the people of the Donbass. They sent in little green men, GRU Spetsnaz brigades from their military service. What did we do in the West? We made a lot of noise about it. You know what? We're going to come up with some really tough sanctions. And the Russians didn't care because it wasn't a credible deterrent. So they did it. They just took Crimea and they took Donbass. So in 2022, is it any surprise as they continue to evolve their hybrid war, their information warfare operations, their sabotage behind the lines, which they continued in Ukraine ever since 2014, assassinating local officials, kidnapping people, is it any surprise when no credible deterrent was given to the Russians that in 2022 they decided, you know what? We'll just take the whole country. Who's going to stop us? You know, another open source reporting, not my opinion, open source reporting, look at it. When Director Burns from CIA went to Moscow to warn the Russians, Putin won't even meet with them. Who did he meet with? He met with Patrushev from the Security Council, and Ivanov and some of the others. And reportedly, when Director Burns told him, in the words of our president, don't do it. We're telling you don't do it. What was Patrushev's reaction? It's very telling. He laughed. He laughed at Director Burns. Okay, well, we're not going to do it. First of all, we're not going to do it. But he laughed. Why wouldn't they laugh? We haven't presented a credible deterrent. And I would argue the only way that this Ukrainian war ends now is if we provide a credible deterrent. The only way that the sabotage, the hybrid war, what the Russians call war of a new generation, non-contact warfare, drone incursions, cable cutting in the Baltic Sea, assassination attempts against corporate leaders, sabotage, hiring misfits and miscreants of society, poor kids, teenage kids that are struggling with whatever they're struggling with, are being hired by Russian intelligence to go blow up rail lines, take pictures of military objects, then blow them up. The only way that it ends is if we provide a credible deterrent in the West. If we understand that hybrid war is not new, it's been around a long time for the Russians, and it's evolved and it's strengthened just as the Russian intelligence services have over the past 20, 25 years. So with that, those short comments, I'm passionate about this stuff. I believe really that we have to understand our adversaries better if we're going to counter them. I'd love to take your questions though. I think it's good to take your questions. So, Jim, I'm fine.
I want to first introduce myself. Hello? I want to first introduce myself. I'm Sean's high school friend. So, I don't mean to waste everybody's time, but Sean did say his voice is a little weak. So
You're giving me a break, sure.
Sean and I, amazingly enough, grew up in the same little small town in Pennsylvania and wound up going to high school together. And nobody would have ever thought, I'm not a spy, by the way, he is, but nobody would have ever thought two people from our little town would wind up in Washington. Sean has gone in one direction, I've gone in another, not quite so high direction as Sean, but we're very proud of him from where I came from in my town. So, I also would be remiss if I didn't thank the mentor that we both had in high school, who is now deceased, but his name is Tom Ruth. He was a real influence on both of us. I don't want to speak
We
for
love
you,
you, Tom. We love
I don't
you.
want to speak for you, Sean, but I imagine that he must have inspired you for your career, not that you knew you were going to be a CIA officer. But Sean and I had a very funny, because we were high school friends together, we also had a very funny coincidence in our lives that another mentor of ours, John Borger, took us on a trip to the then Soviet Union when Sean was learning Russian. And so that's kind of his bona fides. In any event, I'm sorry to reminisce. But my question, Sean, is, given what you understand about the way that the Russian political system works, what do you make of Orban's kind of like gentle departure and Fidesz kind of like disappearing from Hungary right now, given how much is known about Russian influence on Hungarian politics?
Yeah, so thank you, Jim, and thank you for the kind words. We love Tom and Tom Ruth, dear friend. He was like a second father to me. And Paulie was at your house, if you remember, when I went overseas. So we miss him and love him. So I'm glad to remember him now. So yeah, Orban is an interesting case. By the way, Russian active measures. So let's look at what they're doing in Europe. What were they trying to do in the elections? Did you hear about that in the press? There was a plot from the SPR uncovered by the Hungarian services. They wanted to, one of their active measures, one of their attempts at information warfare was to claim, to try to stage some type of, not even an actual assassination attempt, but just the myth of an assassination attempt against Orban so that it could make him more popular, so that he could win the election. That's how clever and how crafty, the title of my book, Dirty Tricks. That's the kind of stuff that the Russians are constantly doing. It's not a new thing. It goes back decades of the Cold War. So Jim, your question is sort of what do we make of what's happening in Hungary and what happened there? Well, I want to comment on one other aspect of what's going on in Hungary. And again, I try to stay out of politics, but this one needs to be addressed and mentioned. In my chapter on dirty tricks, I talk about a term Russians use, polezny durak, so a useful idiot. This is where you don't need to be recruited as an intelligence spy. And I'm sorry, with all due respect to the Hungarian people, for a foreign minister of a country to be coming out of meetings in the EU and then reporting and calling on the phone to Sergei Lavrov in Russia and detailing everything that's happening in those meetings. That's a classic example. You don't need to recruit that individual. He's just helping the Russian Federation. The term, by the way, comes from the revolution. Again, when Lenin used to say, let's take advantage of idiot fools in the West who really believe in the communist revolution. Because we really know what they said to each other and what Lenin famously said. Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the Chekha, was, can't have a revolution without terror. We need to terrorize our people. That's what they're all about. That's what Putin's proud of. The same Chekha and the OGPU, NKVD, the legacy, today it's the FSB. They believed in murdering millions of their own people in the purges. So it's amazing to me, Jim, looking at Hungary, I don't understand, I don't understand how their foreign minister could do those sorts of things. I do know that they have a change for a new government now. I wish them well. They had a free and fair election, I believe, and that's what it's all about. That's what the Russians want to undermine. That's what they don't want to allow, and they should be able to decide their own politics. But I do think it's tragic when that was uncovered. I don't know who leaked it or how it came out, but to hear conversations of a foreign minister reporting to the Russian foreign minister, yeah, that's a classic. It's classic right out of my book, chapter 6. So, thanks for the question. What are the questions?
I'm glad I got your book.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I can't wait to read your book. So I'm wondering, forgive me? Sorry. So I'm wondering, when you look at U.S. Policy, whether it's defense or state, or together? Where does the U.S. need to go in order to be able to engage this process, both beginning, middle, and end? Thank you.
Yeah, so I try to stay on my book strictly apolitical. I made rare comment on international politics today, but don't take sides on any one administration or another anywhere in my book. I think a lot of the praise we've gotten with Naval Institute for the book that's one of the aspects. But one of the things I do advocate very strongly in the book is for Ukraine. I believe the United States doesn't have a right to sit this one out. Okay, we're celebrating 250 years of our democracy. You know, the United States, the 20th century was known as the American century. I don't believe it was because America was a great conqueror. I'll give you an example of why I believe it was known as the American century. I served in Central Europe, and with the Russian attaches, I had the honor of going and celebrating, at the time it was the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II, and we went and visited. This particular area of Central Europe was liberated by both American forces and Russian forces, Soviet forces. What did the American century mean? In the towns that we went to that were liberated by the American army, and it was Patton's army, by the way, we were greeted, the American delegation, small delegation, with our Russian compatriots, because we were allies in World War II. We were greeted as heroes. American soldiers showed up from Germany, from the very units that liberated, cheerleaders, marching bands. I was blown away. All of our delegation was. Then we went to the towns liberated by the Russians to the Russian monuments. Let me tell you, nobody came. Nobody, not a single person came. What does that tell you about what it meant to be liberated by the Red Army, unfortunately? Now granted, of the Allies, they suffered more than anyone. I'm a huge studier of World War II history. I understand it. My wife's Lithuanian. Both of her grandfathers were in the Red Army. They suffered horribly, but they wrought out the same level of vengeance on the German and other peoples that they quote liberated, that they suffered as a country. That's a fact. 2 million German women were brutalized by the Red Army. Where we liberated American troops, we can be proud that those people never forgot how they were liberated. They were greeted with the Marshall Plan. That's what the 20th century as an American century means. We're vying right now for who's going to have the title of 21st century? Russia, China, or the United States? We don't have a right to step back from the world stage. I believe too many sacrifices have been made. You know, those of us that served in the war zones together in this room, for our generation, there's been too much of a bounty paid already. We don't have a right to withdraw. So I feel very strongly that nowhere is the struggle for freedom more stark than in Ukraine right now. Okay, the Ukrainians are dying by the tens of thousands, so they have a right to decide their future. So we have to support them in every way possible. That's one of the things I feel very strongly about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm Dr. Elaine Soraya. I'm the Associate Rector of a private Ukrainian university, which is the first Ukrainian university that was EU accredited. And I've been back and forth to Ukraine throughout the war, and recently just came back from Brussels regarding legal issues for Ukraine. And what I'm asking you right now is what we just looked at, supposedly the conversation that took place between President Trump and Putin this past couple of days, has said that there's going to be a ceasefire, and that, but it didn't take into any account of discussion with the Ukrainians. Can you comment on that? And this all surrounds also the celebration for the close of World War II in Russia. And supposedly they're not going to have a parade. I don't know. Again, would you comment, please, on that? Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the question. I'm gonna pass on the first one. I'll tell you why. I don't like to address policy issues. I was never a policy person. I try to address intelligence issues. I'll address military issues. I've been published on military issues. I've published on the Ukraine war quite a bit. So I will comment on your second point. So why the Russians are not celebrating the May Day parade like they used to. So I was published first in 2023. My thesis won the Russia Deterrence Award at the Air War College. It was published in the British Journal Small Wars. I was published in a book last year, 2024, a major book with a Cambridge publishing house on the air war in Ukraine, with a lot of really folks a lot smarter than me, like Mike Kaufman had chapter 1, if you know him from War on the Rocks. I had chapter 2 on the Russian air power failures. So the Russians have been under tremendous pressure for the past 4 years. If we can help continue to apply the pressure, and if we can present more of a credible deterrent by way of sanctions that matter, the sanctions that have teeth, I think that Russia could be pushed into into peace. But right now, again, on both sides of the Atlantic, and I believe very strongly in our alliance. I'm not in the habit very often quoting kings, but I believe very strongly in what the king said on his visit to the U.S. We can't forget and neglect 80 years of a hugely important alliance, NATO. Remember that it's the envy of the Russian Federation. They have nothing else like that. They don't have a strategic alliance with China. They certainly don't have it with Iran. They had nothing with Venezuela. Look at what they did for Venezuela. Nothing when Maduro was taken down. They talk a lot about, with China, a partnership without limits. Last year was the first time ever that Russia did air defense exercises with China. First time ever. So as an alliance, the alliance is our strength, NATO. We need to work and collaborate with our allies. We have to stop doing the Russians' bidding for them by this constant bickering and calling each other names. I think it's horribly beneficial to our adversaries. But in concrete terms, there's been failures on both sides of the Atlantic. When the EU didn't want to go after the $200 billion some in Russian assets in a Belgian bank. Well, Belgium doesn't want to do it alone. The entire EU doesn't want to go after them. Those matter to the Russian Federation. That might bring them to the table. That might really bring them to the negotiating table. With us, we're constantly deciding, are we going to give them this weapon system or not? Ever since the war started in 2022, the full-scale invasion, we're not going to give them Abrams tanks? Okay, we'll give them Abrams tanks. We're not going to give them F-16s? Okay, we'll give them F-16s. HIMARS? Okay, we'll give it to them in the end. Why don't we finally give the Ukrainian people what they really need? As Churchill famously said, give us the tools, we'll finish the job. Give the Ukrainians the tools they need to defend their country. What limits are the Russians putting on the arms that they're using against Ukraine? They've used everything. Ballistic missiles, air-launched cruise missiles against civilians. Thousands of children have died in Ukraine. So what's holding us back from giving, if not Tomahawk missiles, which a lot of people say might not be the right system, they're generally sea-launched, give them another variation of long-range missiles where the Ukrainians can finally target energy infrastructure all over Russia, like they're starting to do on their own. They're doing it with their own Flamingo missiles. So I believe, as you can tell from my comments, the Russians push until they get pushed back. And we haven't pushed back against hybrid war. We haven't pushed back against aggression against Georgia, against Ukraine in 2014, in 2022. All sorts of caveats on our aid to the Ukrainians. All sorts of limits on what we or the EU would do. Finally give them a credible deterrent, force the Russians to realize, you know what? This war is not going to go any better for you any longer. We see some of the signs of it. We see some criticisms coming out from long-term supporters of Putin. But so that's what I think is needed in terms of ending this war. That's why you see the Russians, not having a May Day parade so much anymore, not risking putting equipment on display in Red Square, which is what I believe they were worried about. They were worried about drone strikes, not being able to protect them in Moscow. So, but I feel strongly there's a lot more we could be doing to support Ukraine. Thank you for your questions. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about Russian disinformation campaigning here in the United States, and particularly evident on all the various, YouTube channels, Rumble channels, people that are Americans that are doing broadcasts daily. Should we be taking firmer action with regard to at least having these people register as agents of foreign governments, so that it's clear who they are and where they're coming from when they promulgate their disinfo on a constant basis?
So, appreciate the question. So, if I had another hour with you, I wanted to spend half hour more talking about active measures. People ask me, what are the most important chapters of your book? I consider the chapter on active measures. We did an interview with Paul for AFIO Now. Active measures is one of the most important chapters in the book. Well, it's a difficult issue to talk about with the American people because it's so emotional. The whole Russia issue and meddling in the elections, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I believe fundamentally, and I believe all the evidence shows from the Senate Select Committee report in 2016 that Rubio was a member, our current Secretary of State was a member of that committee and signed off on it. The DNI report on the 2016 election also substantiated. There was meddling by social media trolls, there was meddling within the election, and I believe fundamentally the goal was to undermine our democracy, all of it. Not for or against any one individual candidate. That was incidental. If that happened, that was incidental to what the Russians are trying to do against democracy. Remembering that they don't want democracy on their borders, they can't have democracy in Ukraine, in the Baltics, in Europe, so they certainly want to undermine our democracy. I also believe, though, that we can't undermine our own democracy by taking away freedom. So no, I'm not in favor at all of not allowing any, or trying to restrict freedoms of the press in any way in our country. That's our great strength. One of the things I mentioned in my book that we should be doing, we have a member of our audience here I know who's worked with this organization. Why in the world did we take funding away from RFE-RL and Voice of America? These are institutions we can be proud of, that editorial content is not controlled by the American government. What a great thing for the American people to say to the world. These organizations we support as free and independent sources of information across the world. And by the way, the US government gets no say in their editorial content. That's how they were set up, by law, fundamentally. So we should be proud of that, and we should allow those organizations to function. I know that for a lot of Russians I know, and in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, they listen to Voice of America their whole lives, many of them growing up. North Korea, Iran, the only source of news they have. We have a privilege to have somebody here that grew up in Afghanistan, that served with us overseas. Voice of America is a great service to the world. We should be funding and continuing to fund those types of organizations. But no, I don't believe we're in the business of trying to say this organization or that particular reporter, I know they're part of the enemy. That's what the Russians want us to do. Fundamentally, they want the intelligence services in Russia want us to divide one another. So they love the disunion. By the way, what issues did they target in the election? What issues do they consistently go at? In any election they go after. It's the issues that are most emotional to the American people. You name it, guns rights, abortion, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, wherever you are on those issues, those were the issues they attacked in 2016. Those were the issues they were on Facebook trying to amp up Americans to fight against one another. They know us quite well. In my book, I call it SVR, their Foreign Intelligence Service, politology. That's what they do. They train their officers. This is a fact. They train their officers. This is what we want you to do on social media. This is how you go at the Americans. And by the way, cognitive warfare has now taken that social media meddling to a 10,000th and 100,000 degree from where it was in 2016, because now people don't have to do it. They can write programs to do it. So yeah, really dangerous stuff. So.
Comment on what you said about VOA. The club.
Joy works with VOS.
Yeah, I'm the head of the Russian service that's been shut down since March 2025. But Simonyan, the moment that executive order, was passed,
She celebrated on social media. She actually.
Who was that? Can you say again?
Simonyan, the spokesperson. Yes, so it's obvious that it's a great victory on their part. But Sean, I do have a question for you. Were you surprised, given your knowledge of Russian intelligence, when the full-scale invasion did take place? How surprised were you that Ukraine held its own?
So I would love to say, Joy, I would love to say, oh yeah, well I know it's all coming. No, I can't say that. What I will say is that fundamentally, a huge part of our military apparatus in and out of government, we got it wrong, folks. We really did. We got it really badly wrong. And why we got it wrong is because we weren't giving enough credit. We weren't studying the Ukrainian military enough. And I think there's a bias that comes in. Sean's personal opinion, if you study the Russian military, the Soviet military your entire career, I think you tend to start to become a bit enraptured by it, saying they're so all-powerful. So what did we have? We didn't have intelligence officials commenting for the most part. You had a lot of retired generals and retired intelligence officials. What did they say in 2022? It's only a matter of days now. It's just going to be a matter of a week or two. You're going to see that Russian army completely encircle Kiev. It's going to end really quickly here. And what did we do as a government? We abandoned our embassy in Kiev. I thought it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. American embassy should never be closed for an ally fighting for their freedom. So I think it was a mistake. I think mistakes were made. I believe that we've learned from them that groupthink can still sneak in. We learned, I think, United States. One of the things I compare us to the Russians, we do learn from our failures. So Iraq WMD, 9/11, there were commissions set up. We learned lessons. I personally worked at a training center dedicated to intelligence agency collaboration. Not going to happen in Russia. There's not going to be any commissions in Russia studying their failures in the Ukraine war. So I do think that we got a lot wrong. Oftentimes the commentary will be, well, we got it right. We said Russia was going to invade. Yeah, but for the most part, we and all of our allies thought Ukraine would lose. Let's be honest. We didn't give them enough credit. We didn't give the Ukrainian people enough credit. We didn't take into account enough what many of us in that part of the world know. Just like if the Russians do try to attack the Baltics, the Balts will fight like hell. Because they know what Soviet Russian-style imperialism is, and they'll fight. They'll fight for their children or fight for generations, just like the Ukrainians are doing. They know what it means to suffer under the yoke of Russian imperialism. So that's the part where we have to understand our adversary and understand the culture and mentality. We don't invest enough time in it, I think. Good question, Jim. Thank you.
Hey, Sean. Great talk. I'm looking forward to reading the book. John Pinnell,
Thanks, John.
recently retired senior foreign service officer. Spent a lot of time on former Soviet states, including in Ukraine. I'm curious as to your thoughts regarding what changed between 2014 and 2022 with the Kremlin. Was it simply a change in tactics, or was it more a strategic change? Why did it go from new generation active, measures, hybrid warfare, to more of an overt conventional component?
Yeah, great question, John. Thanks. John's been a big supporter of the book, helping do a lot of introductions and things. So thanks for coming today, John. And thanks for helping. All of you can help, by the way. If you buy the book, do a review on Amazon. We're trying to get the word out. So appreciate you all being here. It is a mission as much as it's a book, and Naval Institute's a nonprofit, so you're benefiting a great organization. So, John, good question. I think part of what played into it was the groupthink of the Siloviki around Putin. There's some great books on it too. If you read Overreach by Owen Matthews and Luke Harding's Invasion, I quote them in my own book. They were very well done. They pointed out, and I tend to agree with this, I believe, part of my personal view. They point out, for instance, that Sergei Lavrov, the longtime foreign minister, he probably didn't know the invasion was going to happen until days before. Many frontline Russian troops, remember, this was reported on, they didn't know it wasn't going to be just another Zapad exercise, West exercise, like they do every year. But within the Siloviki, they certainly knew, and they'd been planning it out for a while. And I believe there was groupthink at play. I believe there was this idea, again, that, hey, Georgia, it worked. Hey, we don't really suffer any negative results from Georgia, right? Hey, what about 2014? Hey, boss. And that's the way they talk to him, by the way. I know it from talking to intelligence officers. Putin's the boss. These are much more akin to mafia, giant mafia organizations than they are government structures. This is a clan within Putin, his Siloviki. They're running the whole show. So when they're sitting around talking, planning the war, I think it was very much, hey, boss, we got this. Boss, we got it covered. We got the info war covered, boss. We've got infiltrations. Now, I give begrudging compliments to the Russians when it's deserved. Remember, the Ukrainians very quickly, within a year, they had 400 investigations of SBU and other intelligence agency people within Ukraine, Ukrainian service folks who had flip sides and defected. So the FSB, they were working hard too. They were doing their jobs too. But they believed they had it. They believed they could pull off a coup, and that the West wouldn't stop them. Nobody would act. And so I think that then and now, 2022, and even more so now, 2026, nobody's telling the boss man, nobody's telling boss Putin no. Nobody's saying to him, hey, maybe we should end the war, boss. They're just not going to. He's completely in charge. They're completely beholden to him. All of their wealth, all of their corruption, their billion-dollar palaces that Navalny reported on, that's why he was killed. That's why Navalny was popular with the Russian people, by the way, was because he reported on the corruption of the ruling elite. So I think now more than ever, unfortunately, Putin's completely in control. He very much resembles, I read a column for the Cipher Brief. I just do it voluntarily every 2 weeks. Check it out. I've written about this quite a bit. Their culture of murder for hire. It's very much thuggery, what they're doing, using murder as extortion in Europe. Ryan Mattel, you want to help Ukraine? We'll kill your CEO. So this culture, intelligence Chekist culture, I think the downside of it for Russia is nobody's willing to tell the boss. It's like the bunker mentality of Hitler when he was in the bunker. Nobody's going to tell him no. So the war ends when Putin decides it's too much of a cost for Russia, and that's again where we provide credible deterrent against hybrid war as well in Europe, or else the Baltics or Poland. Who knows who'll be next, or the United States here. So I think we have one or two more questions, and then I have final couple comments I'd just like to make in closing. Yeah. So I think, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I'm just very inspired by your book as well. One thing when you're talking, I was thinking about is that there's a lot of issues proposed in this discourse between us and them and Ukraine as well. But in your opinion, what do you think might be the core of the issue between us and the Russian government? Do you think it's something like stubbornness, maybe personality, fear of losing their accrued power? Like, in your opinion, what could it be that had to be pinpointed? Thank you.
Sorry, in regards to what, to ending the war, or just foreign policy misunderstandings, and which specific?
Like overall, because if we're unable to kind of see eye to eye with them in a general sense, that's which is causing all these different types of issues. Is there something more? Are they unreasonable as a people? Are they very opinionated? Like, in your opinion, what might it be?
So good question. So I speak to university groups, and I go for free to talk to high schools, junior highs, and colleges, try to interest them in government service. I think it's important now more than ever. I'm sure many of you in this group will agree to that. We need to inspire a younger generation to serve. And so I was asked a similar question recently, and what I point out, never in recent memory can I recall any Russian leader so exemplifying, realpolitik. Bismarck style, 19th century, you don't like what I'm doing, stop me. Do something about it. Otherwise, I'm going to do whatever I want. That's Putin's brand of foreign policy. So as long as he's practicing that realpolitik, as long as he's invading countries, and then what else does he do, of course? If things aren't going his way, threatens nuclear weapons, right? Well, if you do that, I'm going to use technical nuclear weapons. And the only thing that stopped him on that regard, by the way, which was also really telling, was in 2023. Do you remember when Xi Jinping gave a statement? And Xi said, yeah, not so much. China's not interested in hearing anyone talk about using tactical nuclear weapons. Putin shut up really quickly, didn't he? Shows you the hierarchy even within that system. Russia's more dependent on China now with their economy, with sanctions avoidance, everything, more than ever. So I think fundamentally we're not understanding who we're dealing with here. Forget about looking into the soul of him. We're way past that now, right? Okay, that definitely didn't work. But we're still not understanding чем дышит человек in Russian. What does he breathe? What really motivates Putin? So Putin's all about if we don't like what he's doing, we better stop him. And I think he respects strength. I think fundamentally he respects strength when he sees it. So if he sees the United States and our allies act with strength, I think that he'll respond. And that kind of leads me, and I think we have to wrap up now anyway. I have some kind of final comments I want to make about that. I believe that our allies and those relationships, both bilaterally, intelligence relationships we have, Five Eyes with the UK and our other allies, NATO, these are our strengths. Something Russia can't possibly hope for among its weak coalition of broken states and hollow military regimes like Venezuela, Iran, North Korea. Now, as I just mentioned, China's the big brother in their so-called alliance, which is filled with distrust on both sides. I have another article coming out in the coming weeks. I wrote an article for Proceedings Magazine, the Naval Journal, on hybrid war, by the way, this past week, if you want to check out more of my writing on hybrid war. NATO's an alliance of strength and resilience. It's lasted generations. This is the envy of Russia. Meanwhile, hybrid war, what they call, remember, non-contact war, new generation war, it thrives in those shadows between categories, right? Between war and peace, between the civilian and military. Because we struggle to define it in the West, right? We don't know what to call a cable-cutting operation in the Baltic. Was it just the chance operation that Shadow Fleet tanker drug its anchor for 100 kilometers and cut 2 lines? We don't really know how to judge that, right? I was in Helsinki when that happened in October, giving a talk, and the judge let that crew go. The judge said, I don't know what to make of it. So hybrid war thrives with that ambiguity. Russia's non-contact warfare seeks to persuade democracies to concede politically what they can't secure militarily. So recognizing that, understanding their mindset, where they're coming from, where Putin's coming from, that's the first step. But then meeting it with unity, resilience, and sustained support for our allies, including Ukraine, that's the most important, that's the most difficult step. The question is not whether this war will end if the West looks away. Ukraine war, hybrid war, it's not whether it's going to end if we tuck away and isolate ourselves, we go back to isolationist policies like 1940. That's never going to work. It's whether we understand the kind of war being waged against us before its effects become irreversible. And so with that, I thank you for your time and attention. I thank you for the support to the book and its mission. So I hope those of you that would like a book afterwards, I'm going to stay and sign them. So thank you to IWP. Thank you for giving me this forum and chance to talk about issues I'm passionate about. Thank you all for coming.